What's up, everybody? Welcome to Gojo with Mike Golick Jr. That is me. With me, as always, a man who's got spirit. Yes, he do. He's got spirit. How about you, Brandon Newman? Brandon, what's going on?
It's November, Mike. A new month. A joyful noise for all to hear. I believe that's what the Bible says. We are starting anew, and now only good football teams will win this month.
Ooh, what do you think the joyful noise was? Like, if you had to pick one song that was the joyful noise from the Bible, what do you think it was? I think it was 2 Chainz's birthday song.
Okay, here you go. I mean, now all the clapping in the beginning of that song, which is supposed to be
birthday. It's your birthday.
Clapping.
Yeah,
I have an issue with that slightly, but I think a joyful noise is any noise, Mike. It's like when you're in church and they're like, you may not know the words, you just gotta hum and sing along. It's like it's the point of you gotta get it out to get it in. You know what I'm saying? So it's just a little drum beat, boop 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 boop. Whatever your joyful noise is.
Well, you know what? We hopefully are a joyful noise for you. If it is, we hope you download, subscribe, rate, review Gojo wherever you get your podcast. Leave us a 5-star rating and a review, and check out the DraftKings YouTube channel with the Gojo with Mike Golick Jr. playlist. We had a great show today. Monday Night Football reaction from last night. Wow almighty, the Bengals stunk that one up. Brandon's Baltimore Ravens made a big trade. We got top 5, bottom 5 from the NFL weekend, and another coaching change made in college football. But Brandon, as we get started with the holiday season here today, went out with a bang, trick-or-treating. Did you go out? Did you take the kids out trick-or-treating last night? How'd this go down?
Definitely did. My brother Lance and he brought his beautiful kids, my nieces and nephews over, and we just scoured the neighborhood, Mike. Kind of got out there early before it really got too spooky out there. My son is 2.5, so like random ghosts and goblins actually walking around his neighborhood that he usually walks around was a little bit jarring for him, but candy. And he last night when we put him to bed, he told me, can we have Halloween tomorrow? I was like, no, it's going to be special every year, but no Halloween tomorrow. And he was really upset when we told him that he could not have candy in the morning.
Wait, he can't have candy in the morning?
He had candy for the first time in his life yesterday.
Whoa, okay. You just dropped that bomb on him on the biggest candy holiday of the year? You didn't wean him onto that at all?
He ran through it. Sour Patch Straws to Kit Kats, Twix to Snickers. Like, he was able to name me all the candies he had, and he was buzzing. Reese's, he loved it.
Yeah, no shit. You just opened up the floodgates to heaven for him all at once. Like, there was no training along the way. You just dropped him in the middle of this and said, figure it out. And of course he went crazy.
Well, his favorite food, he'll tell you, is ice cream. So he knows what a sweet treat does. But
okay.
He didn't know that it was like in candy form. You can like chew, and like he was buzzing. He loved it.
Did he have a favorite right off the bat or no?
It seemed like Mike. It seems like it's the Snickers, which is so funny because satisfy your hunger and a spawn of my child. But like I was like trying to grab at him to like make sure what he was about to eat, and then he like shrugged his shoulder and he walked away. He was like, last one, daddy, last one. Like don't worry.
Said, try me, bitch.
Like the fun size Snickers, like he was literally having fun with the fun size candies. It was so funny.
Oh, it's incredible. And explaining the concept of Halloween is interesting. I went trick-or-treating our buddies, Dane and Hillary, who are listeners of this podcast. So hi, Dane and Hill. We went trick-or-treating in their neighborhood with their son, Holden, who's about that age as well, a little bit younger than that. But we took him around and we were like, oh, you want to go get candy? He goes, no, not today. He's like, tomorrow. And we're like, oh, brother, I hate to break it to you. It is not going to be going off like this tomorrow. The crazy part for me was, though, it was nice because I was, I'd been in a neighborhood in Connecticut and done that, but I hadn't gone walking around. I had been person handing out candy on my front porch. I did not realize how drunk most parents are out helping their kids trick-or-treating. The amount of tumblers that you see and slurred speech by the end of the night is incredible to watch being out there among the masses for the first time.
I mean, it's one of those things, Mike. Like, if you could meet your neighbors sober or drunk, which one would you choose? You know, it's like it's very simple. It's like literally New Orleans out there, open carry laws, because there is just people with koozies a lot around here and just sipping their cans, smoking their cigarettes here in Kentucky, letting the kids run around. It was funny. We had, because we wanted to walk around, I left the door open and just a bowl of candy on the front step, and you should see the Ring door camera footage, Mike. If the door is open, the people are like looking in and screaming, "We're just taking one, just one here." They were afraid. They were afraid to really just grab a handful and keep it moving.
I'm sort of pissed because if those kids, especially understanding and being cognizant of the camera, you got to have one of the homies go up there and block that thing off and run interference while you ransack that. I'm sorry. Kids having respect for the take one in the bowl of candy is a real new phenomenon for me, because it used to just be those bowls got jumped in.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Oh, I definitely was like, this is new age kid stuff right now.
Yeah,
like,
they're kids that have grown
around the neighborhood.
They're kids that have grown up with cameras around their entire lives. They're used to people getting caught for stuff on the internet, and they understand they don't want to be the one. Like, they don't want to be the one out here ruining their lives and their futures over a Halloween costume with some questionable moral judgments that may all of a sudden affect their employability later on in life.
Man.
They've grown up with that as a reality in the way that their peers and their parents did not.
Can I say, Black people have taken back something? White faces out here, Mike. I've seen plenty of very attractive minority models going out as like Walter White and like different things. White chicks is back. Like, it's we're in makeup. It's makeup season again. It's blackface season again. Whiteface season again. It's questionable decisions with your costume this season.
Let me just say, white folks, don't make it blackface season ever. Don't do it. The other side of that, I'm not really gonna touch, man. You know what? It's one of those things. I'm like, hey, you know, I don't really find like that offensive, so I'm gonna let that one slide. But like in general, there's a good rule of thumb is you can cross racial lines on a costume without having to make it appear like you have crossed racial lines. If you want to go out as Walter White, that's great. You don't need a white face to do that. If you want to go out as I remember one year, Bomani Jones and Pablo Torre on High Noon went as Jackie Chan and Chris Tucker from Rush Hour, and they did it without making either one of them up in the other race's skin tone. Ooh, so they just went and did it without actually doing it, which is possible, and you can do that and not risk your future employment status at the same time. Just free game.
We're going to move on to sports very, very soon. Mike, next Halloween, we have to go as each other.
All right, there we go. We've got it. Mark it down here, November 1st, 2022. Our promise to you for this time next year. So that's very exciting. Looking forward to that. Brandon, less exciting, Monday Night Football during the midst of all this. The Browns went out and whooped that whole ass. One of the weird stats that I wasn't ready for was Joe Burrow now being 0-4 against the Cleveland Browns as a starter with the Cincinnati Bengals. The Browns win 32-13 in a game that really I think can be best summed up as one team decided to telegraph every play for us is going to more or less be a passing play. We are going to drop back and shotgun. All these conversations we had earlier in the season about the Bengals needing to mix up what they ran out of what formation. They had been heavy run out of under center and heavy pass out of shotgun. They just decided we're going to drop back in the gun because we feel like that's where our quarterback is most comfortable, and our wide receivers had started making some plays. On the other side, you had a team in the Cleveland Browns who was going to line up most every snap and say, hey, we are going to very obviously try and bludgeon you on the ground. We are going to put 6, sometimes 7 offensive linemen into a formation at a time. We're going to hand the ball to Nick Chubb or Kareem Hunt, and we are going to dare you to stop us. And Brandon, you know this as a former defensive player. The latter is far more demoralizing when they can go out there and have their way in the way the Cleveland Browns did last night.
Yeah, I know. We're going to get to the Stanford Cardinal later on, but when you get Toby Gerhart and those thighs coming at you,
Whew.
you know, it's a little different. It's a little different when you can get worn down by fullback-esque running backs in the backfield, because Joe Mixon wasn't putting the fear in the Browns' heart the way Nick Chubb was putting the fear in the Bengals' heart.
No, the only one putting fear in anyone's heart was that Browns defensive front into Joe Burrow's heart. And Brandon, it's interesting looking the way these two teams came into the game, right? The Browns had lost 4 straight coming into this one. The Bengals felt like one of those teams that was maybe riding the ship, albeit against the NFC South. Like, you look at their 2 wins in the last 4 games, Saints and Falcons, not a division and not teams that inspire a ton of confidence. Jamar Chase being out matters because they play a style of offense that requires a ton of playmaking ability from those wide receivers and people in there, because if you are going to drop back every time, and there were a ton of passes at or behind the line of scrimmage, swings to the running backs by Joe Burrow, all these things that really aren't the explosives that we're used to with that team, because now if you were the Browns defense, you got to focus on T. Higgins. You got to focus on the other receiving weapons that spare you comparatively a lot less than Jamar Chase does. And you saw the way it limited that offense because schematically they're not doing much to go out here and create any sort of illusion that something else is coming. It is, hey, we're going to line up and do this, and we think our quarterback and our skill players are better. And when they're not, it looks like last night where Joe Burrow continues to work on a pace this year that looks to have him sacked more than he was sacked in the regular season last year. I think he was sacked 55 times in the regular season last year, or somewhere in the 50s, and is on pace to be sacked like 70 times during the regular season this year with an offensive line they thought was going to be a difference. But last night, I mean, Jonah Williams, their left tackle, was struggling against some of these guys. Obviously, struggling against Myles Garrett, a little bit more understandable. Struggling against the rest of that Browns defensive front can at times be because you've got a slide protection to Myles Garrett. Like, finding 95 in brown and orange, usually a pretty good idea because he's the one that was sent here by another planet. But they really had their way up front on both sides of the ball last night, did the Browns. And while Jacoby Brissett is, the perfect like value above replacement, like he's the replacement level quarterback, we've seen that in his career as they wait for Deshaun Watson to get back into the starting lineup. The lines of scrimmage, when they are stout, can usually give you a pretty decent chance. And we're seeing the Bengals just not really built right now still in ways up front that you're going to be able to sustain against teams outside of the worst division in football.
Well, Mike, I think the Bengals had that quiet, good defense for the majority of the last season, and they tripped and fell into the Super Bowl. This year, the same situation, right? The Bengals hadn't given up a touchdown in the second half in the last 4 games, and against the Browns, they gave up 3. And it's just crazy to think that this Bengals team that we've been watching has been so stout in the second half of games. Obviously, with the Ravens, it's not that surprising, and that was the case then. But I'm surprised that this Bengals team even had it going at one point, because it seems like everything was just behind Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the teams they've won against this year, it kind of makes sense. Like, remember, like, it was beating the Jets. It was beating the Dolphins on the Thursday night game where Tua was knocked out of that game pretty early on, and everything kind of got thrown into a tailspin there. And they're going to have some other opportunities. Their schedule is not the most daunting in the world until you get to December, when you're going to play the Chiefs, the Browns, and, whatever remains of the Bucs at that point. You've got the Bills late in the season, too. But there's a bunch of winnable games against the Steelers and the Panthers and the Titans and some of these other teams. It's just, as we look and try and measure them against the competition we know they're going to see in the much harder side of professional football, it doesn't inspire a ton of confidence. This was what we'd imagined for this team coming into this year, was there was going to be some regression because they were a team that, like you said, caught fire in the postseason. They kind of did what we see in Major League Baseball and hockey a lot more, which is you get a hot goalie or a hot pitcher and ride that through a postseason that usually doesn't reward consistency. For the Bengals, in a single elimination sport, that's usually tougher to come by. But when you had an offense that was balling like that was hitting big plays at such a clip, a quarterback who was somehow surviving the pounding that he took, and that's the biggest worry for me. Like, I always figured the Browns or the Bengals were going to take a step back this season. I always figured that this could and should be the season where Baltimore has the division yet again. And it seems like right now, if you were tracking, you would have the most faith in Baltimore of anyone in this division, despite some of the warts that have popped up for them in the fourth quarters. But for the Bengals, my chief concern is, can your quarterback survive this again? Like, we're not too far removed from Joe Burrow being lost to the season for injury because he was getting hit so much. And if you've got a guy who's getting contacted like this all the damn time, then eventually I worry about what that's going to do. And that's got to be your chief concern as a franchise, because you are only going as that player and your offensive skill have gone.
Yeah, but he's done world-changing things at that position, and you're going to lean on your quarterback in that regard. You know what I mean? Like, at the end of the day, the reason why the Bengals are doing what they're doing is because they got Joe Burrow.
They are. But it's, you know, it's also like, he is the reason, which is why I'm so worried about him getting potentially injured, because the way you're playing right now leaves him exposed time and time again. And he's not built like Superman. It's not like Cam Newton's back there. It's not like Josh Allen's back there. This is a guy who physically is not built the same way those guys are to take that kind of pounding over and over again. Injury was obviously a big story for their defense. They came into that game super thin at defensive back, and Amari Cooper made them pay over and over and over again last night. Amari Cooper was an absolute monster. I think he had on only like 5 catches up around 150 yards. He was sort of let me pull that up for sure. 5 for 131 and a touchdown last night. Wide butt naked open, having a guy that good at route running against guys that were, you know, safeties having to slide outside and definitely backup players was not cute for anybody involved, and created a bunch of wide open looks. Like, they didn't, again, it's on 5 catches. It wasn't like they were airing it out a ton because they got to just sit under center there. And I mean, watching them line up on 2nd and 1 and just say, no, we'll take the first down, and QB sneak their way to a first down. They were trying to go out there and be an efficiency monster. They wanted to make this game as easy along the lines as possible by taking all the risk out of Jacoby Brissett's hands. And it worked against a team that is all risk, no biscuit right now.
Yeah, but the fact that Jacoby Brissett is answering the call the way he is, and you know, has a handle of that offense. I know they're running the ball the majority of the time, but efficient is exactly how I would describe watching Jacoby Brissett play football, especially when he decides to get his big ass out of the pocket and scramble for something. Yeah.
Oh, and that's what they brought him there to do, is to just be a very efficient, very affordable placeholder before Deshaun Watson comes back into the fold. Now, again, it's not like, I don't think they're going to be playing for anything when Deshaun Watson comes back, right? They're not a good enough team. And by that point in time, you're probably going to be out of most things realistically that would have been in front of you, with a quarterback that, forget all of the things that we dislike about Deshaun Watson being around the NFL. If I can for a second ignore that and just focus purely on the football part, guy hasn't played football in like 2 years, and he's been on the shelf for the first 11 games of this season. To expect it to all of a sudden come in, and we saw briefly in the preseason how it looked, which wasn't perfect football-wise when Deshaun Watson came in, to expect that to go out here and do anything getting you close to the playoffs in the toughest half of the NFL and the AFC seems like a fool's errand. And so I don't think this is any harbinger of things to come for the Browns. I think this is more a reminder that right now the Bengals were always a team that was destined to regress like this, because last year was so special in the most important time of the year.
I agree, Mike, but those good, competitive AFC teams, they're going to be there, Mike. The 3 and 4 teams, like, there's some 2 and 5 teams out there that I'm actually still not afraid of, but you can't write off just yet. And I feel like the Browns are like that. The fact that Jamar Chase was out, that was just one huge weapon out, and that Browns defense was able to show up the way they did, is proof that the money they've put on that side of the ball, the Browns got a good defense.
They do. But all this is actually, I think, why, and you mentioned the rest of certainly that division, but the AFC not nearly as dire as its counterpart. But these are all reasons why the Baltimore Ravens might look at this and say, hey, we have a great opportunity to go and try and really put our foot down on the necks of the rest of this division, which is why they went out and joined in the group of teams making moves along the trade deadline. The Baltimore Ravens on Monday traded with the Chicago Bears for linebacker Roquan Smith. Team source confirmed ESPN NFL insider Adam Schefter. The Ravens sent the Bears a second and a fifth in 2023 for Roquan Smith, who is leading the NFL with 83 tackles so far this season. I believe I saw from Ian Rappaport that they actually added A.J. Klein to that as well. So the Bears are going to pay the majority of Roquan's salary for the rest of the season. The Ravens are going to get him for vet minimum, which is, I believe, under $1 million for where he currently sits right now. So not a lot of on the books for the Ravens this year. But Brandon, I want your reaction on this as obviously someone who's a Ravens fan and who's watching this season from that vantage point. The thing that I will say is this is very smart team building from Ryan Poles, the GM of the Chicago Bears. This was not a player that, again, going back to this offseason, you had a chance to re-sign to a long-term deal. Clearly, this new regime was not comfortable with that. This guy was not going to be a part of your plans. He wasn't going to be someone that you'd played the franchise tag game with or signed to an extension. And so if he was going to walk and you were going to potentially get nothing, maybe a compensatory pick for him, the fact that you were able to swing a second-round pick and a fifth-round pick out of that for a team that's got a lot of holes to fill but feels like they might have something working at quarterback now in Chicago, good smart team building, good smart GMing from the top there. But what was, they're in that mode right now. They sold off Robert Quinn, they sold off him. That's the message being sent is, I know NFL fans dispute the whole tanking thing, but they're very much prioritizing their future is the way that I would always spin those things while trying to make sure they continue to develop their quarterback right now. But how did you feel about this from the Ravens side, Brandon?
I think this is huge. The same way that the 49ers added Christian McCaffrey, or I'll say this because it's not apples to apples, but added a huge piece for their offense, right? And you get Kansas City Chiefs add Tooney for their wide receiver room. The Eagles add Robert Quinn to their defensive line room. We talked about all these contending teams adding that one extra piece that's going to help get them over the hump, i.e. OBJ with the Rams last season. Like, the Ravens always need help rushing the pass rusher. They always need help on that defense. They always need help locking in the fourth quarter and keeping everybody back. I think David Ojabo, the draft pick from Michigan, he was the opposite of Aiden Hutchinson with that Michigan offense, our defense last year. He's coming back, about to get active after being injured for a long time. Was it Bowser? Tyus Bowser?
Yep.
Like, he's about to come back as a pass rusher. Like, I think this defense is going to be very, very real with Roquan Smith at the helm. Like, I always loved Patrick Queen, but as a linebacker out of LSU, I thought he was a little bit too small compared to what I usually like what the Ravens are used to seeing as a middle linebacker. Roquan Smith is that type of big body with that athleticism that goes sideline to sideline, Mike. Like, I'm very interested in how he sets this team over the top, because you talking about veteran minimum. That just seems what the Ravens are doing. We got Jason Pierre-Paul making a havoc for a lot of people. Calais Campbell is doing a great job in the middle, and there's just I like the defensive line. I like that defense more than I have in a very, very long time, Mike, because the Ravens have had a lot of holes on defense, and it looks like they're not just done sharing it up throughout the draft and building the roster. Like, the fact that they're adding this piece, taking someone so big from the NFC, one of the best defenders in the NFC, and bringing them over to the AFC, Mike, this is huge.
So for the Baltimore Ravens right now, according to Football Outsiders, they are 25th in rush DVOA, their efficiency metric there. So they've been a bad team against the run-on defense. We've seen some of the late-game gaffes for them in the fourth quarter, giving up big plays, miscommunication on the back end of that defense. So fortifying the middle, not a terrible idea. And for Baltimore, this has to be predicated on the idea that you think if you start to shore up that a little bit more, and as the offense continues to hopefully develop downfield, get healthy in that wide receiver room consistently this year, you think that you've got to be a team that's, a Super Bowl team potentially, because the risk on the other side of this is potentially financially. Are you going to be the ones to give? Because Roquan Smith wants to set the market. He's a guy who represents himself, who went through that with the Bears, a lot of very public back and forth about the way they didn't value him. He wants to be the highest paid linebacker in pro football. He's going to have stats to back that up, even if at times he doesn't always look like the best run defender in some people's eyes. Are you going to pay him that? And then if not, what happens this offseason? The franchise tag is something more and more people are talking about with Lamar Jackson if they can't get a long-term deal done there. So do you want to touch anything with him contractually? Because usually when you make these kind of trades, extensions aren't far behind because the player has so much leverage in these spots. And then if not, you face the potential of him maybe walking this offseason and having lost 2 draft picks at a time where you're going to have to start hitting on more of those if you pay your quarterback. So it'll be interesting from that standpoint what their long-term plans are with Roquan Smith, and if he's a guy that they're going to try and pay top dollar out there before they have to get to paying their quarterback top dollar.
I'll say this, as a fan of this team, I like the fact that the quarterback of both sides of the ball are in a similar situation because they are one of the best at their position in the league. They are represented by themselves, and they have a lot to prove going into next season. So this specific season right now for the Ravens, as they're sitting probably in at the bottom of everyone's top 10 power rankings, even as and they haven't put everything together and they haven't been completely healthy. I like this move a lot. I think this is going to be huge for them this season. Whatever happens next year, obviously, is good for those players, and it's going to be big for them individually. But I think all those different variables help the Ravens become a good football team this year.
I'll be curious if they get anything else done. This podcast is being released on deadline day. So if they get anything else done there, maybe even shoring up wide receiver a little bit more. Eric DeCosta, their GM, has been really active around the deadline, like the 3 of the last 4 years at least. So this is what they do. They prioritize, hey, let's go out here and support this team in the here and now. We talked about the opportunity that they've got in the division. And so as far as that goes, there's going to be a net gain. How much of it for the price that you paid is something that remains to be seen because we're quirky about the value for off-ball linebacker. Brandon, that might be one of the top things of the week for you. We will see if it's in one of the top 5 or bottom 5 things of the week for us here. It's Tuesday on this show. Coming off week 8 of the NFL season, it is time for the top 5 and bottom 5 things that we saw. This week, I have the top 5 and you have the bottom 5. For anyone that's new here, Brandon and I will alternate going 5-1 on the top 5 and bottom 5, give you the best and worst of what we saw from this last NFL weekend. Brandon, why don't you start us off? I think we figured out ending with number 1 in the top 5 is usually a good place to go out. So that means we got to start with you in number 5 from the bottom 5 here. So what do you got?
Mike, our dreams are crushed. Nostalgia for our television is seeping through. We wanted this Detroit Lions team that was built on grit and Dan Campbell to be a sleeper team. And they're at the bottom of the NFL right now. And after a 5th straight loss, Dan Campbell and the Lions have agreed to fire DB coach Aubrey Pleasant. Now, obviously, there's going to be a lot of different coaching decision moves that happen in the NFL right now. This is just one of many, unfortunately, and especially for that Detroit defense that's struggling so much. But Detroit's defense is allowing a league-high 32.14 points per game. That is 225 points in 7 games, the second most points allowed in that stretch in the franchise history, Mike, and that's really, really bad because the Detroit Lions are Detroit Lions, and they've been bad for a long time. I'm glad Barry Sanders is getting a statue outside of that stadium. I think that's the one thing that the Ford family has done right in a very, very long time. But it's sad to see that they're starting to make cuts and changing this coaching staff up that was made solely of all former players, Mike. As soon as I heard that when Hard Knocks was on, I was like, it's going to get really sad when these former players, coaches that are being championing now are going to start getting cut just from lack of results. But this is where we're at in the season.
Yeah, and for Dan Campbell, some of that's going to be self-preservation. These are the moves that are made when there's probably a head coach that's also feeling some of the heat about his future job security. This is what happens. That defense has been bad, and Dan Campbell and a staff full of former players knows as much as anybody, it's a bottom-line business, and if the bottom line's not being met, someone's going to have to pay for that. It sucks. That was a coaching staff we all really liked a lot, and people losing their jobs is never a ton of fun. Brandon, let's go to the other side. Top 5. Good defense. The Browns defense. We just talked about him. 5 sacks in this game. Joe Burrow now 0-4 against the Browns' career. So much of that because Myles Garrett and that group were able to turn him over and just put him on his back time and time again last night. When Myles Garrett's humming, it's one of the most fun things to watch in sports. He's just capable of so much shit because of how physically gifted he is and being such a smart and, capable guy besides that.
Yeah, he's nasty, and I'm so glad because he was that number 1 pick for the Browns, and coming out of Texas A&M, it's great to see how important he's been to the league.
I was happy for that too because he was one of the guys that was different. He liked to read. He liked dinosaurs. He liked all this stuff that people usually use. They use it as a negative against him in the draft, and then they're like, no, this guy's built in a way that maybe like 3 human beings ever have been. Take him and prosper, and they did.
Right, exactly, and because of that, he's built for the league for the long term. So I'll stick with that game with my number 4 to go to the bottom 5, Mike. Jamar Chase being out 4 to 6 weeks, and then the Bengals sucking without him. I think it's we've talked a lot about how important he is and how big he is, and it seems like it's a little nagging injury. I know the other wide receivers for the Bengals are like, oh, it's not going to be that big of a deal. We'll have him back. It's like, yeah, y'all get more touches now. We can see that you're not that worried about Jamar Chase being starting in the starting lineup, but it's unfortunate because he proved last year just how important a dominant wide receiver can be, and there's so far and few between, as much as quarterbacks are far and few between in the NFL. So be excited to get Jamar Chase back. It was like when DeAndre Hopkins was out and proves how great he is when he's back in the lineup. So the Bengals need him, the NFL needs him, and definitely Cincinnati needs him.
Yeah, and it's not like they have slouches in the rest of that room. T. Higgins is a really good receiver. Tyler Boyd's a really good slot receiver, but we're seeing the importance of that one guy that can kind of make it all go with how gifted he is. Great segue into number 4 in the top 5, the Tua to Tyreek Hill tandem from this past weekend. Ooh. Now, part of the reason the Detroit Lions had to make changes is because the Dolphins threw all over them. Tua had 382 yards passing in that game, 188 of them on 12 catches that went to Tyreek Hill. And when that thing's coming, and it just, I think at a human level, great to see Tua back out here and being able to play really well after what will be one of the scarier injury moments of the NFL season and one that prompted so much change. This offense with speedy wide receivers like him and Jalen Waddle in space where Tua can go time and precision has really worked out well so far when he's been healthy and on the field.
Yeah, I mean, and Jalen Waddle too, who hadn't really seen the end zone a lot, got 2 touchdowns against him. So, yes, and I didn't like Chris Haynes coming for his Waddle. He's like, that wasn't a very inspired Waddle. I've seen. I was like, okay, let's relax.
Yeah, let's not be out here grading Waddles, Chris.
Yeah, exactly. So my number 3, bottom 5 in NFL is Tom Brady and his 3-game losing streak, Mike. Obviously, we know the Bucs are struggling this year, but the 45-year-old quarterback hadn't lost 3 games in a row since 2002 in the New England Patriots, which is so crazy, and he's not used to it, and he's been on the Let's Go podcast talking about how they're not used to it and his personal problems at home getting in the way. So it's good to hear him be honest about it, something that we've all speculated about for a long time. I still think I wished he would have been a Masked Singer. That would have been a little bit more wholesome for us to digest of why everything's going.
I'm sure he wishes why that would have been the reason too.
Yeah, I mean, and a lot of Bucs fans as well. So I don't know. I think it's nice. It's nice for me. I know I got it number 3 in the bottom of the NFL, but there's a changing of the guard right now when it comes to quarterbacks. But it's still kind of good to see that people still believe in Tom Brady because I'm writing this Bucs team off. Like this, I've seen enough. I've seen enough.
I know, and we should. It's just the division they're in. No one is going to be mathematically eliminated from the NFC South this entire season because the whole division is so bad that the Bucs will be playoff eligible, I'd imagine, for most of the season. And Tom Brady is, I'm sure, seething in a dark room right now trying to figure out how to destroy everybody after the slights that have been thrown his way.
Eat
Brandon,
sometime.
Brandon, number 3 on this list, a person who has certainly had many healthy meals. Derrick Henry, his 6th 200-yard rushing performance, tied some all-timers in his quest for that as well. He is now one of just 3 running backs to do that, joining O.J. Simpson and Adrian Peterson to have 6 200-yard rushing performances. Went out there in a game where they had a rookie quarterback making his first start. Wasn't a ton of help to him, and it didn't matter because Derrick Henry is still somehow, after injury, after the workload from the last couple of years, capable of shouldering the load on his own in a way that few players in NFL history have been.
I can't stop thinking about that Alabama picture of Mark Ingram looking up at Derrick Henry.
It's the best. It's one of my favorite it's one of the best sports pictures of our lifetime. It is so incredibly memeable,
Yes.
and even in real time, we all recognize it wasn't like something like how Family Guy sort of aged really well. It went away quietly and then developed that cult following and got brought back. This in real time automatically got entered into the conversation for one of the best. It was appreciated while it was still doing its thing.
Yes, but I feel like it was important because Mark Ingram was so effective in the NFL. You know what I mean? It'd be different if it was a guy who hadn't found so much success as well.
It is a weird reminder of the fact that NFL can really accommodate so many different body types that can be successful even within the same position.
Amen. Body positive NFL. I like that. That is not a good segue for my transition. But sitting at number 2 at the bottom of the NFL, Mike, the Las Vegas Raiders, blown out by the New Orleans Saints of all teams. One of your dad's favorite teams going into this year. It's so unfortunate, and the Raiders fans are calling for Josh McDaniels' job. Mike, I know he's been a head coach before, but it sucks that no one can get that taste out of their mouth. They're like, no, this is a continuous losing record for a head coach. Like, we're not shooting him any bail. And then, as we mentioned off air, he has a scapegoat. He has the scapegoat in the way of Derek Carr, that MFer, talking about Tom Brady, who's putting together one of his worst seasons completely. In the game where they got blown out, he was 15 of 26, 101 yards, no touchdown passes at all. One catch on 5 targets for Devontae Adams. It just looks really bad for a team that has weapons, Hunter Renfrow and other things like that. Like, I know they've been injured and things like that, but I feel like the Raiders are supposed to be better than this. The AFC West was so good because you looked at that entire roster and all those weapons on offense, and it's proven to be really more of a 2-horse, 1-horse race, with the bottom being very, very bad with the Denver Broncos and the Las Vegas Raiders.
Yeah, I think people are obviously going to have questions about Josh as a head coach because of how poorly the last time went, and then that weird flirtation with Indianapolis that ended up so bad. Like I said, they've got a contractual out with Derek Carr if they want to try and make a move. We talked about that with the Lions after this season with that in mind, but the offense generally hasn't been as much of the problem this year. This is a weird game. I was talking to Jason Fitz, who's a friend of the podcast and a Raiders fan, and says it was as uninspired and sort of sleepwalking a performance as he's seen in quite some time by people that are usually pretty good in the way that they go about this offensively. Defensively, we knew this roster, outside of adding Chandler Jones, which was helpful up front with him and Max Cars and the pass rush you've got there, that tandem, didn't really, expect a ton out of the rest of that defense. So it's been rough. It's been rough so far. But I feel like as long as the offense can right the ship, that as your coaching identity can at least carry you through year one. Brandon, number 2 for me, a team that did show up offensively, The Philadelphia Eagles, A.J. Brown, 6 for $156 and 3 touchdowns. He's been, we're talking about the trade deadline so much. He's looked like one of the best, if not the best trades made this NFL offseason, and the net that he's returned, what he's done in helping Jalen Hurts, their young quarterback, continue to take the right steps, man. It's been flat out dominant from this Philadelphia offense, who went out against the Steelers team they were heavily favored against and had a really mature, big-time win.
Yeah, I mean, it was a big boy win. I really did think that the AFC was stronger and the Steelers would prove formidable against their in-state foe, but no, the Eagles are real. But coming in at the bottom of, for me, for NFL, Mike, is the class of 2021 NFL quarterback class. Yes, I'm talking about Trevor Lawrence. I'm talking about Zach Wilson. I'm talking about Trey Lance. I'm talking about Justin Fields, Mac Jones. I'll throw a stray in there with Kyle Trask and Davis Mills. Right?
How you gonna do Kyle Trask like that, man? Kyle Trask is just sitting over here minding his own business, backing up the GOAT.
I'm watching you too, Kyle. I'm seeing your development or lack thereof. But I just, this class was lauded, Mike, and everyone's talking about it being the change for the NFL and the changing of the guard, and it has been to an extent. But it's been those younger quarterbacks, Mike, the Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes of the world, that class that was actually a world beater and changed the NFL landscape. But I understand that this class is going to show out and show up and eventually be franchise savers. But Trevor Lawrence looked bad. Justin Fields needs protection, but he looks good enough. Zach Wilson looks terrible. Honestly, probably should get benched for Mike White, but they won't do that because of the money. Trey Lance obviously needs to get healthy again, but Mac Jones, Bailey Zappi even sniffing at a starting position is unfortunate for Mac Jones. And the only reason I think Mac Jones is fine this week is because he played Zach Wilson in the Jets, and Zach Wilson's 3 interceptions last week. Just a little disappointed in that quarterback class. We'll keep watching. I know it's not. They still have time to mature and maturate, but I don't know. I think it's time to kind of start looking at that quarterback class with a bigger magnifying glass.
Yeah, at some point we'll spend more time on that this week because I think there's interesting differences in all their situations. There's reasons, but it's definitely been lackluster, and this past week especially for a lot of those guys. Trevor Lawrence, who I and so many others want to see succeed because of the talent there especially. That same's been true for Justin Fields. Trevor Lawrence, it was as lost, especially late in the game, which has become a thing for him in fourth quarter and not taking care of the football that you don't like to see. Brandon, number 1 on the top 5 to finish off week 8 in the NFL, Christian McCaffrey and the San Francisco 49ers. Ooh. Christian McCaffrey rushing for, receiving, and throwing a touchdown, became the first player since LaDainian Tomlinson in 2005 and just the 4th player since the merger in 1970 to go for all 3 in one game. Immediate return on investment for that franchise that gave up the goods to get him out of Carolina. Just cool. We're still going to get to see the best of it when Deebo Samuel returns. I think it's all of us who enjoy watching the interesting football that's put on display for the Niners. I want to see what those two guys are capable of on the field together, and that'll be the most fun.
Fair, Mike. I hear you, but we may have seen the best that we have seen from Christian McCaffrey for this team because of that touchdown throw that he threw and how beautiful it was and how big it was and how many yards was up under it. And because of that touchdown catch that we saw, Mike, like that game specifically was a highlight game. You bring up LaDainian Tomlinson in 2005. Like I remember the game like that. Like I think this may be that shining moment for him. And obviously, hopefully they can have trophies to add to this. So it seems like a footnote, but right now this is the shining star, this game.
It is, and again, it works out best for you if this player is not on the field, taking as many hits, having to have as many carries, and be as much of the focal point. He was the everything for that Carolina offense, and we saw for a guy that had been banged up plenty in his career, that's a concern. Less of a concern now because of all the fun weapons in that 49ers offense. So that is the top 5, bottom 5 from Week 8 in the NFL. We also got plenty that went on in college football. Week 9 there, the college football playoff rankings are coming out for the first time tonight. Tuesday, November 1st, the first round of that, as the committee will convene down there in Texas to start, because we've had the AP rankings and all that. For anyone new and unfamiliar, totally different set of rankings. You throw all that out the window to an extent and try and figure out how that's going to go. So to help us take stock of what's coming up tonight, where we're at in this college football season, ESPN sideline reporter and Vegas stats and information host of VSiN Final Countdown, Stormy Buonantony, joining us here on the podcast in just a minute to talk about everything we saw from this college football weekend. Telegraph.
Just time for chaos to ensue.
I know, which I feel like is kind of a good thing, right? That if we've made it this far in the season and there's been so much happening that we haven't had to default to just like what the top four looks like, that's probably a win.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I'm still curious, though, like how they're going to play out the top four. Is Tennessee going to be one? Or is Georgia going to be one?
That's kind of like the biggest question I have. So why don't we dive into this? Because in looking at the top four that's going to come out when this podcast releases, it'll come out Tuesday night. How do you think that shakes out at this point when we look at the top four, the way it's set up, right? We have the AP top 25 at this point that sits with Georgia at 1, Tennessee at 2, Ohio State at 3, and Michigan at 4. Do you think that'll be how it shakes out for the CFP?
So, like, for me, Georgia is the number one team until they're proven not to be, just based on, like, all of the numbers. Top 2 offensively in yards per game, one of the best defenses in the country. But Tennessee has the better win, right? And they're both undefeated going into this weekend's game. So a lot's going to change between this week and next week. But where things sit right now for me, I have that being the way that things shake out, although I would probably honestly have Alabama 4. And I know that that's going to upset some people in the thought process to have 3 SEC teams in the first set of college football playoff rankings. But what does the committee do? They take away all of the things that the AP poll looks at and kind of scrap it down to, okay, what is eye test? Who do we firmly believe is the best? Who has the better wins and head-to-heads? And, I mean, the loss that they have is against Tennessee, who you could argue is the top team in the country right now, or the number 2 team according to the current poll. And it was on a walk-off field goal. And obviously, I'm on the betting side of things, and I look at things a lot through that lens. And I was talking to an odds maker just this morning who said for him, Alabama in his power ratings is number 3. So that's the way I look at things right now, is I would see 3 SEC teams in the top 4.
I think it's a good reminder, too, that the committee scraps it and starts over. It's essentially like nothing has happened, which is hard to do because we're all human. We see the numbers attached to so many of these teams. We see the numbers attached to some of the matchups we've had over the year. Like you mentioned, Bama and Tennessee, that being the loss. Or, Georgia having a win over now a top 10 Oregon team in that first weekend of the season. I also think it's always interesting. One of the metrics the committee loves is that strength of resume. How would the average team in college football fare against what you've done so far? And that ends up usually being 1 through 4, the top 4 teams we get at the end of the year. Right now, 1 through 4 for that is Tennessee, Ohio State, TCU and Clemson at 3 and 4, with Georgia and Alabama right after that. And those are kind of the teams, Stormy, that because I'm with you. I think the top 4 as it is in the AP poll is where I'd have it right now. Part of it's easy because Tennessee and Georgia are going to play this weekend. So we'll get an answer to that one way or another. But where they do put Michigan, Alabama, Clemson, and TCU, because I feel like this Clemson team, while the resume is strong and you've technically got some good wins to point to, still feels like the one that's teetered on oblivion more so than any of these top teams.
Yeah, like Clemson for me is such an odd team because they have looked vulnerable numerous times. They're the number 5 team in the country right now, but they've had those close calls. Obviously the Syracuse game, the double overtime one at Wake, 6-point win against Florida State. And I keep on just looking back to last week before the bye, the last time that we saw the Tigers. So recency bias is certainly playing into your head a lot here, but DJ Uiagalelei gets benched. He turned the ball over 3 times, had 2 picks and the fumble that was returned for the touchdown. And Kate Klubnik and Dabo have said all the right things, and it's DJ's team. Makes the comment, Steph Curry goes 2 for 25. The best players can have a bad day. I did love Aaron Murray, I think, who had that follow-up of like, let's not compare DJU to the best 3-pointer of all time. But neither here nor there. But yeah, they've not looked to the standard of a great Clemson national championship caliber team to me. So it'll be really interesting to see how the committee views this team. And especially, like, I think a lot will be interpreted this coming week 2 against Notre Dame.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by that one. Are you, like me, a little shocked Clemson only opens up a 3.5 or 4 point favorite in that game?
Yeah, especially because the look-ahead line on that game was Clemson 5.5. And I think it's going to be a fun game, you would hope. As far as, like, normal everyday people looking at this game, maybe if they don't watch a ton of college football and they're just looking at the way that a schedule is played out or something, you're like, oh yeah, Notre Dame's been better. They both played Syracuse recently and Notre Dame blew out Syracuse, whereas it was a closer game for Clemson. But I'm in my head, as somebody who does pay attention to those games, I'm like, okay, yeah, but Garrett Schrader did get knocked out of the game and they faced Carlos Del Rio Wilson. And yeah, Notre Dame played really well. They covered the 1.5 point spread, no problem. But I think that that's a very misleading, lopsided result over then top 15 opponent. So maybe for the average fan, you look at that and you're like, oh, I could see it, but I do not see it. And maybe that's because, I mean, you're obviously an alum and a former player, and I'm just a Notre Dame fan, so I'm just innately pessimistic about this team in general. So maybe you can relate on that, but
Deeply.
For as many questions as I have about Clemson, like I have just as many, if not more, about Notre Dame.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on that. I was stunned. I think, like you said, it is a little bit of the, false equivalency of a recent common team put into that. Notre Dame right now is real questions in their passing game and went up against a Syracuse team that was beat up and small up front. That will not be the case when Clemson rolls into town. People talked, I heard about the Notre Dame home and road splits. They've played bad teams that they've played down to at home. They sloughed off against Stanford and Marshall, and they lost those games. They've played up for North Carolina and for the Syracuse game, BYU on the road as well. And so I think you're going to get a more dialed-in Notre Dame team. I still just don't know if top-end talent-wise against that defense, they're going to be ready for that same party. So that one's going to be really interesting to watch. Clemson, we mentioned, is that swing state team. Was there any concern for you, speaking of watching the game for Ohio State this past weekend? Close one that got blown out a bit late. The backdoor cover that absolutely ruined my weekend from Penn State and the Nittany Lions. But was there any part of that was cause for concern for you?
Well, so I got the 15.5. So you have to get in earlier on the numbers sometimes here, Mike. But yeah, so it's kind of a mixed bag in terms of cause for concern and also being like maybe more impressed than I expected to be as this game came down to the wire. So they're down 5, go on this 28-3 scoring blitz to pull away, which reminds everybody who Ohio State is as a team, who they are as a contender. CJ Stroud wasn't his usual self for half the game, ends the day with 354 yards. Trayvon Henderson, overall, can't really get going, busts out for the 41-yard fourth quarter touchdown. So this was the first time really all season, aside from kind of that early slow start against Notre Dame week 1, right, where it didn't look easy. And I mean, every team's going to stub its toe at some point, but the Buckeyes stubbed their toe and got to learn that lesson in a win. And this is an offense that has topped 40 points 6 times. It has had every win this season by double digits. And defensively, how about, oh my gosh, I can't say his name. JT
Tuimoloau? Is it Tuimoloau?
Look at you go. Something like that. I haven't covered Ohio State closely enough to have learned that pronunciation yet. You know what I mean? Like you cover certain teams on a week-to-week basis and you're like, okay, I will not mess this up. That's one I haven't had to do yet, so I'm sorry.
I'm gonna go with JT Tuimoloau. That's gonna be my official pronunciation on this one for the podcast. Okay. Ohio State fans, please lead with kindness and help us. We want to learn the young man's name because he popped in game 1 when I saw them against Notre Dame, and surprise, surprise, the 5-star talent eventually erupted for a moment like this.
Well, it was so cool. And yes, please, Ohio State fans, give us the phonetic because I need it. But first FBS player this century with, let me look at it, 2 interceptions, 2 sacks, 1 forced fumble, 1 fumble recovery, and a touchdown in a single game. And he deflected that one pass that got picked off by their other defensive end. So So cool. So yes, there were cause for concerns, obviously the way they played early in the game, but for him to have this breakout star performance and for them to be able to pull away in the fourth quarter, like that's what good teams do, right? Is they overcome things that are going wrong for them, and to win in that fashion, I was very impressed with.
Yeah, and for them now, you look at their schedule, it's really just circling the Michigan game for Ohio State and Michigan from here on out. That's likely going to be 2 undefeateds waltzing into the stadium for that game here. I had Michigan this past weekend. I have still, I think, very real questions about can they have a consistent enough downfield passing game to go up against the Ohio States of the world now that defense is a lot more figured out than last year, because they went up against one of the worst pass defenses in the country in Michigan State and really still had nothing to speak about working downfield. So much of it was still Corum working underneath, that offensive line working guys out. And so I would be with you in that would Michigan be the one? Then you mentioned Alabama in your top 4. Would Michigan be the odd man out?
They would be the odd man out, but I really like Michigan. I just feel like if you had Michigan playing Alabama right now, who would you have winning?
Yeah, I would have Alabama, because I think they're very similar teams. Yeah. Alabama, the difference is Michigan defensively has been productive this year, top 10 in sacks after losing 2 great, pass rushers in David Ojabo and Aiden Hutchinson. Haven't really replaced them with one guy necessarily. The team sack leader has 5.5 sacks on the year, so it's pretty spread out. Alabama's got one of the best, if not the best, pass rushers in the country in Will Anderson. They've got a legitimate game breaker that you've got to worry about every game. So yes, I'm with you. I would probably err on Alabama over Michigan if you put them head to head.
But Michigan, you obviously mentioned the lack of the downfield pass game, but if they can run the ball like they did against Penn State, they probably are okay with that.
Usually works out pretty well. Last one here, and then I want to get some NFL with you, because I know you have a good bit of Christian McCaffrey, San Francisco 49ers propaganda that we need to spread on this podcast. As you look at the rung of college football right below this in the top 10, we mentioned TCU, Oregon, USC, Ole Miss rounding out the top 10 here. We usually have, in every given college football playoff cycle, one team that comes from outside that original top 4, top 6 that works their way into the mix. Are there any of those teams in that bunch there that you would be buying as a team to keep an eye on down the stretch?
Well, there are a few. You listed a bunch of them that I think are very deserving of that consideration. Probably if I had to pick one, I would say TCU would be my pick of that bunch. But the Pac-12 still very much so, in my opinion, has a chance, right? Because right now their 3 top-ranked teams are all just one-loss teams in Oregon, USC, and UCLA. And if, let's say, Oregon and USC are in that Pac-12 championship game, one of them ends up still being just a one-loss team. So Oregon, for example, if they beat Utah and then beat USC in the Pac-12 championship, their lone loss is that week 1 game where they got embarrassed to Georgia and hadn't found their footing yet. You can't really hold that too much against them, can you? So that's a team that I think could be very intriguing. USC obviously is going to want to put themselves in that position offensively. They're so impressive. But TCU for me, if I had to pick, would be the one, especially with the way that they've just been able to establish dominance and get those wins in conference that you need to get over your fellow ranked and top tier teams.
Yep, and I think for both of the conferences you just mentioned, important that you're going to get a round-robin style champion. The Big 12 obviously has been doing that for a while, the Pac-12 doing it this year, so that 13th data point is going to be a quality win, as opposed to Clemson, who's going to end up playing whatever comes out of the Coastal, as opposed to Ohio State or Michigan playing likely Illinois, which I shouldn't say that. Illinois, who will likely be the Big 10 West champion, would be an absolute tough out, and I think a really quality win for whoever picks it up. But the other ones, you're talking about a top 10, while Georgia or Tennessee is going to have one loss after this weekend. Ohio State or Michigan is going to have at least one loss after that final weekend of the season. So I'm totally with you. I think it's been one of the more exciting seasons in terms of parity in college football, and we're lined up schedule-wise for that to continue all the way down to the end. But that's not all we got to talk about here, Stormy. The NFL has been giving leading up to the trade deadline. When this podcast releases, November 1st, we will have the NFL's trade deadline, and one of the moves that rocked everybody everybody. Christian McCaffrey going from a struggling Carolina Panthers team over to the San Francisco 49ers. For you, what about this was most exciting to you? Like, how much does this help not only this 49ers team, but help Jimmy Garoppolo, who is now the starter from here on out after the Trey Lance injury?
Oh, well, do you mean the fact that Christian McCaffrey taught him how to not underthrow a football? Because he can throw a touchdown pass now, apparently.
It was one of my favorite stats. I think I saw Ben Solak from The Ringer put this out, that Jimmy G had his first pass of 30 or more air yards outside the numbers since he became a 49er after 52 games. Christian McCaffrey also had his first pass of 30 or more air yards outside the number in his second game as a 49er, which tells a big part of the story.
Second game, 10 days with the franchise, and this is what this guy's doing. It's so cool. When you ask me what's the most exciting part of it, one, I will tell you, so my fiance is a diehard Carolina Panthers fan. I used to live and work in Charlotte and worked for the team, so I got to know Christian well, was a big fan of him. So that's been like an emotional thing in our household, whereas when we got CMC, I was like, hey, Chris, this is awesome. You can still root for him because he's on my team now, which is your second favorite team. And he said, F you, but not just that. That was like the immediate response. So
I was going to ask how well that went over here. I know we had talked so much about, the eventual things for your guys' wedding and stuff. I wasn't sure if that had put too much of a hole in the side of this thing, but it sounds like you guys will be able to navigate through that. But the initial shock, it's tough.
Yeah. Yes, he's still going to keep me, so that's good. But I have been somebody who, like, from the offseason and for the past couple years, ever since Christian McCaffrey signed that big contract, I've been one of those people that was like, when he is on the field, and I have to preface that by saying when, because he has largely been injured and he's not going to play a full slate of games in a National Football League season. He's just not. He is one of the most dynamic and impressive players in all of football. He is that Swiss Army knife. He has the explosiveness. You can line him up anywhere. He can catch the football out of the backfield. He can be that ground and pound running back if you need him to be. But he's not healthy enough. So I'm always like, take his unders, don't draft him in fantasy. Like, I am that person. And now I'm just sitting by my bedside praying Christian McCaffrey prayers every night that he stays healthy because he's incredible. And what we saw this past weekend against LA was that on a day when you don't have Deebo Samuel with the hamstring injury, who has been your kind of do-it-all player in the past, on a day you don't have him, Christian McCaffrey re-elevates and re-energizes that entire offense, rushing, receiving, throwing touchdown. No other running back since the 1970 merger has done that outside of LT and Walter Payton. So incredible company to be with. He is just such a fun player that I really hope he stays healthy because he gives that 49ers offense just a different dynamic, another security blanket that Jimmy Garoppolo, quite frankly, does need. And I'm so excited. I'm trying to contain myself, but it's hard. I don't want to get too ahead of myself here.
Well, and you did get the best version of Jimmy. And I think as much as is exciting to watch Christian, and it's going to be exciting to see what Kyle puts together when him and Deebo are on the field. You had the bit during the broadcast about how Deebo went up to Jed York and was like, thank you for doing this. Thank you for bringing us another one of these dynamic chess pieces. It is all about the quarterback situation here. And with Jimmy Garoppolo, you saw above 80% completion percentage in this game, the highest for a Niner since Steve Young this past weekend. Do you think this can elevate Jimmy Garoppolo to the place where this team can be a true Super Bowl contender, where it's not just winning a beat-up NFC West this year?
I absolutely do. And, oh gosh, the fact that the Seattle Seahawks are leading the division. What is happening? Geno Smith looking like West Virginia Geno. It's a whole, I am still trying to figure out when they're going to come down a notch, right? Because they just keep on seeming to exceed expectations. I had Seattle as one of my handicaps coming into the season. I had Seattle as one of the worst teams in the NFL, and look what they've done. Like them in Atlanta, and they're both leading their divisions right now. What is happening with the world? But yes, I absolutely think that Christian McCaffrey is going to make Jimmy Garoppolo better because he, just like Deebo is that yards after catch monster, Christian McCaffrey can make something out of nothing. He can make a small play a big play. And Jimmy Garoppolo has had problems with being on target with those downfield throws. And so if you can have a guy that is trustworthy in any situation, that can also free up the pass game a little bit with what he's able to do in the run, it's going to make life so much easier on Jimmy. It's going to make him look a lot better. And I mean, everybody on the team loves Jimmy Garoppolo. They want good things for him. They want to fight for him. And he has been a proven winner with that team. Like, you can talk all the trash that you want about him, but San Francisco has been a more effective team when he has been the quarterback. So let's let everything come together and make them a real NFC contender. I think what a lot will come down to too, Mike, is just defensive health. If they can continue to play hard defense and be healthy, because when the injury bug hits this team, they fall off a cliff.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, especially in the last couple of weeks on both sides of the ball in the trenches, getting Trent Williams back healthy for the second week in a row this past weekend, getting Nick Bosa back healthy, and we clearly saw the effect that defensive front had, albeit against a very embattled Los Angeles Rams offensive line this past weekend. A massive, massive uptick. And like you said, right now it's a two-team division with them and the Seahawks. The Rams are just too much attrition on that front. Allen Robinson's starting to come along a little bit soon, but it doesn't seem like, at least, it's been a regular season bugaboo with them against the 49ers. That's well documented over the last number of years as Sean and Kyle have been at the helm.
Now?
8 games in a row in the regular season. Now, I'm sure Rams fans will tell you they're happy to have the win when it counted in the postseason. I don't want to bring that up here. I know it's
still too soon. Jaquiski Tart, what are we doing?
It's always going to be too soon, but I really do think for you guys this year, it is a two-team division right now, and as we all do look and wonder, can this last with the Seahawks? Everything about the 49ers is battle-tested, and that includes Jimmy Garoppolo and where we know this team can get. So an exciting time in that division, an exciting time for your home team, and one that I'm glad your marriage is going to be able to survive here as you guys just flipped Christian McCaffrey over.
The Panthers scarf here and the Niners scarf. Like, this is my life daily. It's a lot.
And the fact that the Panthers this past weekend lost the way that they did, like, it was so brutal. And I'm sorry I'm putting you on the spot here. Like, the Panthers have to trade DJ Moore, right?
I don't think they're going to end up trading DJ. I think there might be one or two other pieces there, but I think DJ, I think Derek Brown, I think Brian Burns are all going to be guys that end up being part of the core that stays there, because helmet toss aside, that's a dumb rule that needs to be changed. He still shouldn't have done it, and Eddie Pinheiro, make the kicks. 2 kicks under 50 yards.
Gosh.
Make the kicks.
Like, I get that the extra point, you were put in a tough spot, and as soon as you saw the penalty, you just knew that the bad things, like the spiral effect, was going to happen there. But the 32-yarder after your defense gets the interception off Marcus Mariota and you're not able to deliver your team the win, like, come on, be better. But we were joking on my show today, Mike, about the DJ Moore play. I was like, I'm not mad that he took the helmet off. I'm mad that he caught the football to begin with, because Carolina needs to make wholesale changes. They need to get draft capital, the whole thing. I was like, he shouldn't have even made it a game. They need to tank. They need to get a good draft pick, all this stuff.
I mean, listen, they need to put Baker Mayfield back out there if that's what they want to do, because PJ Walker threw the longest pass in the next gen stats era. Who had that on their bingo card for this season? So PJ Walker,
the former XFL star, going next level, baby. I love it.
You know what? He's fueled by the power of knowing that the XFL is now back. Now that he has seen all the names released, PJ Walker's strength is intensifying here. That's what we didn't account for.
The draft, by the way, 2 weeks away from right here in Viva Las Vegas. Get ready. The XFL draft coming at you.
Oh, there we go. More Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson down on football fields announcing names with gusto. Stormy, is there anything else for you? You mentioned so much of what you cover is from a betting angle. When we talked to you last time on the show, we were coming off of one of the first of now many Detroit Lions overs and defensive lapses. We saw them give up yards in droves this past week against Tua and the Dolphins. They made some changes in their defensive coaching staff. Are there any other trends like that right now that you're following as far as your bets in the NFL for the back half of the season?
I mean, the Lions, despite that game after I last spoke to you and them actually having an under, they've been over still the rest of the way. So I wasn't totally off, okay? It was just that 1 week. It was a bad look, but the overs have still been the look for Detroit. Cleveland, also a really, really good over team to this point. the Philadelphia Eagles first halves, they are 7-0 against the spread in the first half. So that's been an angle that I've been betting a lot with Philadelphia. The last time they were 7-0 straight up, by the way, was when they went to the Super Bowl with Donovan McNabb. So who knows if that's a little preface here.
Yeah, I was going to say, AJ
hump.
Brown's got the most receiving yards through this many games since T.O. that season. So it is a lot of very interesting vibes.
Yes, things coming together. And then under teams I was looking at too, Buffalo, Denver, and Indy, especially, I mean, Denver. Yeah. Like, they've had one over all season long, and I expect that to just continue to be the trend. This is an offense in Denver with Russell Wilson that I had such high hopes and expectations for, and I think everybody did, that has just fallen completely flat, and the lack of red zone success and everything. And Russell Wilson last week with the high knees on the airplane, it's I don't know. And then to see Seattle have as much success as they're having on the other end without him, it's a whole thing. The Denver Broncos are so hard to watch. Get them off primetime forever.
I think that's what really has magnified this, is we for some reason, I mean, I know why we did it, but had them lined up for like 6 primetime games that now seem like a form of torture that we're subjecting a nation to with this team. I'm also upset because, like you mentioned, Russell Wilson had the high knee fiasco. He's taken a lot of heat, so part of me was happy to see him play better down the stretch. That pass to Hamler was very vintage Russ as far as the deep ball that helped set up the game winner. But he went back to the Denver let's ride after the game when they were losing. He's a fair weather rider, and I don't know if I appreciate that from this guy who's supposed to be all about branding.
See, and I get that you can't do this post game, but I fully thought at the London presser when he said that we're ready to rock, I thought that was going to be the new thing. I was like, okay, Broncos country let's ride isn't working out, maybe it's going to be ready to rock. But I get you can't say that post game, so we'll see what it is. Don't be a fair weather let's rider though. For us, gosh, that is it's so cringy, Mike. And I'm sure he's go ahead.
Oh yeah, I'm sure he's a wonderful guy. I'm sure he is a guy who winning matters to him. Some of the slander that's gone to his work at that doesn't belong there. The guy was doing high knees on the plane. He clearly cares about winning, but it's always just been a little hard to digest.
Yeah, that's the thing. And then you get the talk of him having his own office and being separated from the team, and maybe, there's a lot of things going on behind the scenes that we don't fully know the inner workings of. But I know from what I see on the outside looking in, I'm like, Russ, what has happened to you, my dog? It's not working out. One thing before you let me go that I was curious about, just because it's Halloween time, I saw your post about the Halloween candies, and we are, as if we weren't simpatico on just so many other food related things, Reese's Shapes. Yes, you are my people. Far and away the best candy. The peanut butter to chocolate ratio is just different, and they are way better. They are just better.
See, Stormy, an enlightened woman in so many senses, all the sports stuff. This is really where it matters, and you're so right. I was thrilled, too, to see as I went to go. I was getting ready to go trick-or-treating with my friends and their kids, kind of take them around the neighborhood. I wanted to bring an offering, and I went to CVS. They already had the Christmas tree shapes out, too. So now I've got pumpkins and Christmas tree to offer the youth, both of which slightly different chocolate to peanut butter ratio, both a fantastic time. The one thing I do have to ask you to this front then, since, again, if we're tracking the same way here, where are you at on the Reese's Fast Break bar?
It's top-tier candy bar, and I don't think it gets enough respect.
Stormy, that's why we love having you around here, because you just get it. You just get it.
I haven't even heard somebody hit me with a Reese's Fast Break in a long time. Those things are super underrated. That's like when I would go on road trips and I'd go to the gas station before a road trip. That's like, instead, I don't grab a Snickers, I grab a Reese's Fast Break. That's so funny.
Exactly. It's a little bit softer than the Snickers. The Snickers a little more abrasive. And you're right, a great road trip candy. So guys, listen. Go.
Oh, no, and all of the shapes, I don't discriminate. I love the Reese's, bunny, the eggs that you get, the heart at Valentine's Day. All of the Reese's shapes are top tier. And I was wondering, though, did you dress up when you took the kids out?
Yes, I went. Now, it was interesting, and I'll post pictures with this episode more than likely. I went back. It was a little bit of a last-minute shopping experience, but I went with the Squid Game guard outfit. So the all-pink outfit with the mask and the shape on there. And
Scary.
Yeah, scary, and also a little bit on the small side. Having to buy an XL in a bulk costume shop, not necessarily what my body type is built with. So again, we'll post pictures, people can judge for themselves. But I saw you went the granny route, which you did what my sister does a lot, which is zig when a lot of people zag on Halloween.
Yeah, so like people love like the hot girl Halloween, and that's just never been my vibe. And so I went to a Halloween party over the weekend, and I did the full on like old lady makeup, wrinkles on my face, and it even had like an inflatable butt thing that was just like hilarious, and the big like just fully like covered as I could be. I was to be this old grandma, but it was a ton of fun. I tried to like break it down dancing to be the cool grandma. And then on my show earlier this week, my co-host and I did Tom and Giselle, but I was Tom and he was Giselle, so I'll have to send you some pictures of that too.
Oh, please God, yes, I need proof of that. That's an incredible flip of the script there. Applaud you guys on that one. I hope you guys were able to get through the whole show together and not have to leave before it was all done.
We legitimately had to do it for the last block only because I knew I wouldn't be able to keep it together. And I was laughing through the entire 15-minute segment. I was like, thank goodness we had the forethought to just do this for one segment to close the show, because I couldn't look at him. He's wearing like a spaghetti strap t-shirt and like looking like crazy as Giselle, and every time they would take the one shot of him and he'd be diving in on Monday Night Football, giving all the stats and info that you need to bet on the game, and he looks terrifying in the best way.
Those are always the shows where I hope major news breaks, and so at some point someone might have to clip that or use that sound, and you've got him as Giselle having to deliver very serious news.
Yes, after we get off this, I will text you a photo. I definitely looked more like a Karen than I did like Tom Brady. I had the hair just wasn't very complimentary, but I tried my best.
You know what? You did your best. It was, I'm sure, a trying 15 minutes or so because you couldn't have carbs or any sort of like fruits or nightshades during that time period too. So thoughts and prayers making it through that. Stormy, as always, the advice, the takes, the food, and most importantly, your house being able to survive the cross-country trade of Christian McCaffrey. All incredible. Thank you so much, friend.
Thank you. And yes, I will continue the CMC prayers for my relationship and for his health.
All right, Brandon, before we get to this, that, and the third to finish off the day, one last bit of news out of the world of college football. Stormy, wasn't surprising that it happened, whether you believe A.J. McCarron, former Alabama quarterback who had come out and said that Brian Harsin was going to be let go at the end of the year, or whether you just saw the last year and change of college football involving the now former Auburn head football coach. Brian Harsin was fired by Auburn after just under 2 seasons. He finished with a 9-12 record. Side note for us, just as people who are college football fans coming up in the 2000s, Cadillac Williams is going to be the interim head coach, the former All-American running back at Auburn, who's been on he's going to be the interim coach. He's been there for the last few years as the running backs coach, but Cadillac Williams going to be taking over, which is a huge bit of nostalgia for people our age. Saw the last year and change of college football involving the now former Auburn head football coach. Brian Harsin was fired by Auburn after just under 2 seasons. We can have that as a segment for a different day on this. But Brandon, this had been inevitable. Auburn had a weird season where they had been in some games that had been unexpected. You figured that this might have been coming along the way. The timing of this also not coincidental. Auburn, who had been operating without an athletic director, was getting set to name John Cohen, the former Mississippi State athletic director, as their new AD, and by all accounts just didn't want to have this be the first thing that he came and did, firing a new head coach, or firing the old head coach as his first act as the Auburn AD. And Brandon, for anyone that was unfamiliar why this was inevitable, going back to last year, you had a bunch of stuff with Brian Harsin on this team about his status relative to the vaccine and his availability and those things there. You had an attempted coup this offseason in February when Brian Harsin was on vacation out of the country. You had Auburn launching a probe into investigating his tenure because so many players had left in the portal this offseason. Coaches had left this offseason as well for similar positions across college football. Derek Mason had gone with the lateral move of going from their defensive coordinator over to being the defensive coordinator for Oklahoma State. All these things that ended up finding nothing. Auburn found nothing, and Brian Harsin called it a personal attack. But at that point, we saw the writing on the wall. Then in August, you had the former athletic director for there as well, who had brought him over in Alan Green, let go, and you kind of all like everything around him. It's sort of like a GM that brings in a quarterback or anything like that. These people were tied together. Brandon, Auburn is messy as far as a job. It is super well known that this is a place where the boosters call the shots. You've got a bunch of high-level boosters that basically make all the decisions here. Now, if you're a coach looking at this, you've still got tons of money coming out in this situation. They're going to pay Brian Harsin $15.5 million as a part of his buyout. 2 years ago, when they fired Gus Malzahn, they agreed to pay him $21.7 million in his buyout. So they've got money to spend. They have got the resources that can make you a good team in the best conference in college football. And so all those things are appealing. You just have to go in being comfortable, not being in charge of most things, because, again, there are a lot of cooks in the kitchen in this particular organization, and you got to be comfortable with the idea that you could be fired sooner than later. We mentioned the new hire at athletic director could be important because the last AD was basically at war with the boosters over making that his hire, bringing in Brian Harsin. And this is a place that loves them, not only some Auburn, but loves them having some SEC ties. And Brian Harsin didn't have those, and Alan Green didn't have those. And so now you've got an athletic director who is of this conference, was a coach in this conference, and has been an athletic director at another school in this conference. And I'd imagine most of the candidates you're hearing right now, like the Lane Kiffins of the world, Mark Stoops, even Hugh Freeze's name is going to make the rounds in this conversation again, may have a better shot just because it'll all be done now, I'd imagine, if not fully on the terms of, at least with much heavier involving the decision makers and the power brokers that have always been in charge of this place when you really look at what's getting done around there. So it's a messy job. Listen, for your personal well-being and your sanity, probably not the best place to be if you're a head coach, but for your bottom line and your paycheck, and for most of these guys who, Brandon, you and I both know, like most of these coaches are so sure of themselves. There's so much confidence that you have to have in yourself that you're like someone that looks at a toxic significant other and goes, I can make it work. I can fix them. Most head coaches are wired to believe, no, I can be the one to do this. And that's why someone is going to take this challenge, because the potential reward of what you can do on the top end of this, won a title in 2010, played for another one in 2013, I think won their division in the SEC in 2017, or at least a share of it. Like, it is possible there, and you're going to be paid handsomely to go and endure what is a bit of chaos around you. The last year and change of college football involving the now former Auburn head football coach. Brian Harsin was fired by Auburn after just under 2 seasons. I think having someone who is an experienced SEC coach, so there's going to be name clout that comes with that, I think, and the people that we mentioned are all people familiar around this conference, right? Lane Kiffin's been, if not the voice of this conference in so many ways for a while, wildly successful on the field the last couple of years, did it in the portal this year, like all the things that are going to be important in modern college football. The reason we're seeing, there's a great article on ESPN.com about why we're seeing so many hires and so many firings, during the season in the last couple of years, because now you have that early signing period for college football in December. Now you have the transfer portal window that opens up December 5th in college football. You've got to be out here trying to figure out who you're going to get in place to make that run, because now just sitting idly by and letting your roster get gutted by the portal isn't the way people are going to do business. And Brandon, it's a shame. Like I always want to say, first and foremost, my thoughts are with certainly there's families and coaches that are affected by this. We were both part of a coaching change at Notre Dame. It affects a lot of people's lives in a very different and outsized way, not the least of which is the players. Players who will have their entire lives changed by this decision. They came here for one person, and at least now they've got the transfer portal as a tool at their disposal. They're not locked in and trapped by this situation because now the person they were here playing for, even if, there are, thoughts that maybe because you had so many people leave this offseason, it wasn't a person they liked playing for. I don't know that. But they've got that recourse now. The tough part is it's going to rob them of one of the wildest times you and I ever experienced, which was that break after the season before we had a new head coach hired, where it was lawless. Because now you're not going to get that. The head coach is going to be in place before December, ready to go with all that stuff, boots on the ground. You and I, when Charlie Weiss got fired by Notre Dame in 2009, we had a stretch there. We did not go to a bowl game that year. And before we went home for winter break, we had a stretch where they were bringing us in for workouts. They were technically truly voluntary at that point because we had no head coach to tell us what to do. And Brandon, those were some of the most lawless, going out every night of the week and partying times I can remember. It was, in its own way, very fun and freeing because we never had that little accountability to anyone above us ever again in our college careers, and none of the players that are involved in coaching changes this year, because it sucks. Again, I do feel for them because there's nothing fun about this. The rest of your season, the focus is going to be what's happening around you at head coach. You're going to have, Cadillac Williams there, who I'm sure, is a guy and a voice they're familiar with, but it's different. Everyone sees the writing on the wall now that your season's gone to shit. And at the very least, we had that point in time where we got to go out there and really spread our wings, going out on campus in a way that we normally didn't get to.
Football coach Brian Harsin was fired by Auburn after just under 2 seasons. The third to finish off the day. One last bit of news. Wasn't surprising that it happened. Former Alabama quarterback Harsin was going to be let go at the end of the year, or whether you just saw the last year and change of college football involving the now former Auburn head football coach. Brian Harsin was fired by Auburn after just under 2 seasons.
We reeked like booze in the weight room for that stretch of weeks. I couldn't imagine what it was like being our God love our strength coaches just trying to go out there and earn their paychecks before everything changed there. Again, not fun, sympathetic for everyone involved, but that was a very weird period in our lives where we were truly free of responsibility for that stretch before everything got started. That now is just not possible because of the schedule. So good luck to all those guys. A lot to take stock of there, and I'm sure we'll have news in the coming months, very complicated news, leaks, other coaches getting big paydays based off this news and agents using it for leverage, all those things in a world where Jimmy Sexton exists. But Brandon, in the meantime, a more important question that I have to ask you today is, do you know what time it is?
Former Alabama quarterback Harsin was going to be let go at the end of the year, or whether you just saw the responsibility for that stretch before everything got started. That now is just not possible because
beautiful, soulful. Pay attention and download, subscribe, rate, and review this podcast wherever you get your podcast. Leave us a 5-star rating and tell Brandon how much you enjoy getting back out of spooky season for this, that, and the third. Brandon, you know what else is back? The XFL is back, Brandon. We are going to try and make spring football happen come hell or high water. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson at the helm for this one. We know in 2020, it really had been going well, and then COVID-19 obviously was going to make it impossible for Vince McMahon to keep pumping money into this league. And so They're bringing this back. The season's going to kick off in February. It's going to be broadcast on ESPN. You've got 8 teams. There's going to be 16 quarterbacks assigned, 2 per team on November 5th. And then following that, the draft is going to take place the 16th and the 17th out in Las Vegas in Nevada, or in Enterprise, Nevada, excuse me. So we've got the Arlington Renegades, the DC Defenders, Houston Roughnecks, Orlando Guardians, San Antonio Brahmas, Seattle Sea Dragons, the St. Louis Battlehawks, and the Vegas Vipers, Brandon. A lot of familiar names at head coach for some of these teams. Rod Woodson, Hines Ward, Terrell Buckley, Wade Phillips, Bob Stoops back in the mix as well here. You're going to give spring football a chance, Brandon? You've got 8 teams. There's going to be 16 quarterbacks assigned, 2 per team on November 5th. And then following that, the draft is going to take place the 16th and the 17th out in Las Vegas in Nevada, or in Enterprise, Nevada, excuse me. So we've got the Arlington Renegades, the DC Defenders, Houston Roughnecks, Orlando Guardians, San Antonio Brahmas, Seattle Sea Dragons, the St. Louis Battlehawks, and the Vegas Vipers, Brandon. A lot of familiar names at head coach for some of these teams. Rod Woodson, Hines Ward, Terrell Buckley, Wade Phillips, Bob Stoops back in the mix as well here. You're going to give spring football a chance, Brandon? Oh, Bruce Buffer? I am excited because I like the opportunity. To your point, I was one of the guys that played in these side leagues. I played in the FXFL, which is a worse version of all of these leagues, but it affords opportunities in a league, in a sport that does not have minor leagues. It doesn't have feeder systems. It's not like when we were growing up and you had NFL Europe, which was a place where guys could go over and try and extend their career and get back to Sundays. I think it is interesting that back-to-back people that have been at the helm of this have come from the world of professional wrestling, because I think part of this is also how you package this. Yes, at the end of the day, we'll watch the NFL's proven. We'll watch pretty much any football you put out there anytime. We have a sickness for it. But with these guys, they also understand with something new, one, you got to have deep pockets, and that's what Vince had that was just subverted by the pandemic. He was willing to burn cash on that. The Rock is also someone who has a shit ton of money. He's in a movie every other week, and he's the highest paid actor in Hollywood. So he's got money that, in theory, I think him and his partners are ready to burn on this. But he also has an understanding of how to package things and make them interesting, and make them interesting to the broadest section of people possible, which is what you're going to need in this. So I'm always hopeful because I want to see the opportunity for these guys, and The Rock is usually pretty good at making stuff that is inoffensive and very easy to consume for the masses here. Black Adam doing very well currently for the DC universe. Brandon, speaking of branding, this is cool news. So Nike had a while back announced that they were bringing on a bunch of their first round of NIL athletes. Bronny James Jr., Caitlin Clark over at Iowa, some names well known around the world of college sports, both on the men's and women's side. Jordan Brand, which is its own separate thing for anyone that's unaware of that within the Nike and Jordan cinematic universe, made their announcement of the first athlete that will be joining the Jordan family as an NIL athlete. Kiki Rice, who's an incoming freshman at UCLA, one of the most decorated players in the class of 2022, was a Gatorade Player of the Year, all those big-time things, is going to be the first Jordan athlete in the world of college sports. I saw a video of her presenting her UCLA teammates and support staff, all with a pair of Jordans as kind of a thank you for everything that they've done there. So cool to see young ballers, man, getting a chance. We know Shoe Money has been in college basketball for a while. It's why we've had all those fun NCAA probes that amounted to exactly jack shit over at places like Kansas, because for a while the Shoe Money was the deciding factor where a lot of these one-and-done players were going to end up playing college sports. Now the Shoe shoe companies can be just like, no, we'll toss you the bag over the table and we'll let everybody know, yeah, you are going to be a Jordan Brand athlete. Now, it works out, I believe UCLA is a Jordan school anyway, so there's good synergy there for the people that were always worried about that stuff. But also cool for Kiki. I mean, what a time to be alive, to be an incoming freshman and to have a Jordan deal the way that we've seen, where women's basketball has a lot of really great star players with a ton of name recognition in the sport, especially over the last few years.
Fun NCAA probes that amounted to exactly jack shit over at places like Kansas, because for a while the shoe money was the deciding factor where a lot of these one and done players were going to end up playing college sports. Now the shoe companies can be just like, no, we'll toss you the bag over the table and we'll let everybody know, yeah, you are going to be a Jordan Brand athlete. Now, it works out, I believe UCLA is a Jordan school anyway, so there's good synergy there for the people that were always worried about that stuff. But also cool for Kiki. I mean, what a time to be alive, to be an incoming freshman and to have a Jordan deal the way that we've seen, where women's basketball has a lot of really great star players with a ton of name recognition in the sport, especially over the last few years.
I think they're more prepared for it than we ever could have been, because they've been forced to live this life longer than we had at their point. Like, we had never had to grow up and make the kind of decisions that a lot of these players did, at least relative to our sport. We know plenty of guys that had to grow up early. That's not what I'm disputing here. But in the sports sense, it's become a business a lot sooner than it was a business for us. And so I think, right, wrong, or indifferent, that makes these athletes in some ways more prepared than we ever were to go out and handle this stuff, because soon it's going to be normal. Soon this process is not going to be first. It's going to be this class of Jordan athletes in college, or this class of X brands athletes in college, and that's going to lead to more and more of these players being comfortable, even if the NCAA wants to be jackasses and not provide them the resources to help out like we saw last week. But I'm not going to raise my blood pressure again for those people. They're on their way out. They're old King Viserys. They're missing half a face at the dinner table. That's what the NCAA is.
It's become a business a lot sooner than it was.
I mean, it does feel. You know what? I won't even be that negative, because that's a slight to King Viserys. King Viserys was a good and decent man, and the NCAA is a bunch of shit. There's good and decent people in there. The NCAA as an organization can kick rocks. Brandon, let's get to the third, though. This is truly unhinged. The individual who serves as the Stanford tree mascot has been suspended after unrolling a banner that says Stanford hates fun during the Cardinals game against Arizona State. The Sun Devil helped the tree unroll this banner that had written out in like spray paint, Stanford hates fun. A Stanford athletic department spokesperson confirmed the suspension, stating, quote, the students comprising the executive committee of the LSJUMB, I have no idea what that acronym stands for, have suspended the tree mascot due to a violation of the band's policies and processes. So this was confirmed by the tree itself. The previous tree, number 43, said it would be back in 44's stead in the meantime. So apparently the tree union, or the group of them, are going up here and having each other's back. Brandon,
the Sun Devil helped the tree unroll this banner that had written out in like spray paint, Stanford hates fun. A Stanford athletic department spokesperson confirmed the suspension, stating, quote,
I'm going to be honest, too many letters. Too many letters.
LSJUMB.
Gotta fix that. I understand it's probably someone who paid a bunch of money or did something very important to have their name attached to that. Too many letters. Stanford, y'all gotta fix that. Not the rest. The rest of us aren't all nerds like you. Brandon, this is not the first time that the tree has been in trouble around there. Very real trouble for the band in 2016. The band was suspended for reasons that included hazing, sexual harassment, and alcohol abuse. So that not cool. This, back in 2006, objectively more hilarious. 2 students who served as the tree were suspended. One got ejected for dancing in an undesignated area during the NCAA women's basketball tournament, which, if you're the mascot, every area should be a designated dancing area. First, especially for that weird-ass tree.
Too many letters. Stanford, y'all got to fix that. Not the rest. The rest of us aren't all nerds like you. Brandon, this is not the first time that the tree has been in trouble around there. Very real trouble for the band in 2016. The ban was suspended.
Also, I'll say this. Another mascot got suspended after her blood alcohol level was measured at a .157 during a men's basketball game against Cal in 2006. I just assumed anyone who was the mascot was a little drunk while doing it. Because it seems like one of those things that by and large, unless you're like Cosmo, the mascot out of BYU that's got to do a bunch of really well choreographed dance moves that involve high-level athleticism, if you're the Stanford tree that is anything but high-level athleticism, I figured you needed to be kind of drunk for that to be an experience that was worthwhile. Also, .157 is really drunk.
Another mascot got suspended after her blood alcohol level was measured at a .157 during a men's basketball game against Cal in 2006. I just assumed anyone who was the mascot.
When they rolled in to put on the costume.
It's like one of those things that by and large, unless you're like Cosmo, the mascot out of BYU that's got to do a bunch of really well choreographed dance moves that involve high-level athleticism, if you're the Stanford tree that is anything but high-level athleticism, I figured you needed to be kind of drunk for that to be an experience that was worthwhile. Also, .157 is really drunk. Well, also a tough place to be drunk because you're likely going to be pretty hot inside those costumes. That's the last place I'd like to be hot and moving around while drunk. On the costume. And you got a bunch of loud, fast shit happening around you all the time. You know what? That would probably put you more at ease, though, I would say, than anything else. It's not like if you were high inside that, I would have wicked anxiety being down in a football field. Too much happening all at once. Not a very chill environment. Not good vibes for that. Well, also a tough place to be drunk because you're likely going to be pretty hot inside those costumes. That's the last place I'd like to be hot. And I feel like it would be an incredible contest to see which mascot could survive the game and do their job the drunkest would be in its own way very funny. It'd be like Dizzy Bat, but even higher stakes. Brandon, I will say this. Kind of a brutal cell phone by Stanford, who was accused of hating fun and then suspended the mascot for pointing out that they hated fun. There's something there in the connective tissue. We hope that there was something here for you in this podcast. If there was, make sure you download, subscribe, rate, review Gojo wherever you get your podcast. Leave us a 5-star rating. Leave us a review. Check us out on the DraftKings YouTube channel. Go subscribe to that. It makes it super easy to find us later on. You can then go to the Gojo with Mike Golick Jr. tab on there and watch all our great videos that Brandon works so very hard to get up on God's internet for you. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you tomorrow.